Hey guys, tonight we're going to take a long, slow journey back to a land of floating gardens, obsidian blades, and powerful emperors. We're heading to the heart of the Aztec Empire, a civilization renowned for its grandeur, its complex rituals, and its fierce warriors. But beneath the impressive veneer of power and intricate societal structures, there's a surprising truth about the imperial palate. The surprisingly bland diets of mighty Aztec emperors. Imagine, if you will, the great Montezuma II, ruler of millions, seated on his throne, about to partake in a meal fit for a god. You envision exotic meats, vibrant fruits, and rich, complex flavors. How utterly simple and, dare I say, slightly unexciting his daily fare truly was. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're up for it, drop a comment below with where you're listening from and what time it is. Lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself transported to the bustling city of Tenochtitlan, the magnificent capital of the Aztec Empire, built on an island in Lake Texcoco. The air is warm and humid, carrying the faint scent of roasting maize, damp earth, and the distant murmur of thousands of voices. You are standing, perhaps, in the grand courtyard of the imperial palace, a sprawling complex of stone buildings, vibrant murals, and lush gardens. Somewhere within these walls, the great Tlatoani, the emperor, is preparing for his morning meal. You anticipate a lavish spread, a symphony of flavors and textures befitting his divine status. A mainstream historical fact is that the daily life of an Aztec emperor, while filled with ceremony and immense power, also involved a remarkable degree of personal austerity, particularly in their diet. Unlike European monarchs who might feast on roasted boars and elaborate pastries, the Aztec emperor's daily meals, especially breakfast, were surprisingly simple, centered around the empire's most fundamental foodstuff, maize. The idea was less about indulgence and more about sustenance and connection to the common people's primary food source. Now, for a quirky tidbit, Spanish chroniclers who observed Montezuma II's court reported that his first meal of the day was often just a bowl of atole, a thick, warm gruel made from ground maize. No fancy omelets, no bacon, just a humble, filling corn porridge. Imagine ruling an empire of millions, with vast tribute flowing into your capital, and your breakfast is essentially glorified cornflakes without the milk or sugar. It's certainly a testament to the fact that imperial power didn't always translate to culinary extravagance, isn't it? Historians still argue whether this imperial dietary simplicity was a deliberate display of humility and piety by the emperor, a reflection of the empire's reliance on staple crops, or simply a cultural preference for less complex flavors. Was it a conscious choice to remain grounded, or just how things were done? Regardless, this focus on the basic sustenance of maize formed the foundational stone of the Aztec imperial diet, setting a surprisingly modest tone for the ruler of such a magnificent civilization. You'd certainly rethink your own breakfast choices after pondering Montezuma's Morning Atole *. Having established the surprising simplicity of the Aztec emperor's breakfast, your mind naturally turns to the bedrock of Aztec sustenance, maize or corn. This wasn't just a foodstuff. It was the very essence of life, intertwined with religious beliefs, social structures, and, of course, every single meal, even those of the mightiest rulers. A mainstream historical fact is that maize was the most fundamental staple crop in Mesoamerica, cultivated for thousands of years and forming the caloric backbone of societies like the Aztec Empire. It was far more than just a grain. It was considered a sacred gift from the gods, particularly from the deity Sentiotao, the god of maize. You would see vast fields of corn stretching across the fertile lands surrounding Tenochtitlan, their tall stalks swaying gently in the breeze, providing sustenance for millions. Every part of the plant was used, from the kernels for food to the husks for wrapping, and the stalks for construction or fuel. Now, for a quirky tidbit, while we might think of corn primarily as a vegetable or a processed flour, the Aztecs consumed it in myriad forms, many of which would seem quite exotic to our modern palates. One of the most common preparations was nixtamalization, a process where maize kernels are soaked and cooked in an alkaline solution, often lime water. This process not only makes the corn easier to grind, but crucially unlocks essential nutrients, like niacin, preventing deficiencies. Imagine the early ingenuity involved in discovering that soaking corn in ash water made it more nutritious and easier to work with. Without nixtamalization, the Aztec diet would have been far less healthy. It's a culinary innovation that predates modern food science by millennia. Historians still argue whether the dominance of maize in the Aztec diet was purely a matter of agricultural efficiency and caloric yield, or if its deeply embedded cultural and religious significance contributed to its near-exclusive status as a staple. Was it practical necessity, or profound sacred reverence, or a combination of both? Regardless, the omnipresence of maize meant that even the emperor's diet, while featuring other elements, always returned to this humble yet powerful grain. You would encounter tortillas at every meal, hot and freshly pressed, perhaps tamales, wrapped in corn husks, or that comforting bowl of atole for breakfast. It was the unifying flavor, the constant presence, the quiet heartbeat of the Aztec diet, even in the most opulent of settings. Asterisks beyond the omnipresent maize. One particular beverage held a place of unparalleled prestige, flowing not just in cups, but through the very veins of Aztec imperial power, cacao. But don't imagine the sugary hot chocolate you might cozy up with on a cold evening. This was a rich, bitter, and potent brew, truly liquid gold. A mainstream historical fact is that cacao, the bean from which chocolate is derived, was highly revered throughout Mesoamerica, including the Aztec Empire. It was not primarily a food, but a ceremonial drink, a form of currency, and a luxury item consumed almost exclusively by the elite, warriors, and priests. You would see cacao beans traded in bustling markets, their value often comparable to gold or precious jewels. For the emperor, Xochitl, the Nahuatl word from which chocolate comes, was served frequently, a testament to his wealth and status. Now, for a quirky tidbit, Aztec Xochitl was prepared in a way that would be quite surprising to modern palates. The cacao beans were roasted, ground, mixed with water, not milk, and often spiced with chili peppers, vanilla, or achiote for color. Crucially, it was unsweetened, or at most, very lightly sweetened with honey. It was also often frothed by pouring it repeatedly from one vessel to another, creating a thick, airy foam on top. Imagine a dark, bitter, spicy, frothy drink served cold rather than a warm, sugary treat. It sounds more like a culinary challenge than a comforting beverage, doesn't it? Historians still argue whether the high value placed on cacao was primarily due to its stimulating properties. It contains caffeine and other alkaloids. Its perceived aphrodisiac qualities, or its deep religious and ceremonial significance. Was it a stimulant, a luxury good, or a sacred elixir, or all three? Regardless, the emperor's daily consumption of copious amounts of Xochitl was a powerful visual symbol of his wealth and his connection to the sacred. You would observe his attendants carefully preparing the frothy beverage. The rich, earthy aroma filling the air, knowing that this was a drink reserved for the most powerful. A potent reminder of imperial privilege that tasted nothing like your grandmother's hot cocoa. It definitely puts a new spin on chocolate cravings as you contemplate the emperor's modest atole and bitter Xochitl. A fascinating paradox emerges when considering the Aztec imperial diet. The stark contrast between the ceremonial abundance sometimes seen at feasts, and the relatively simple, staple-heavy daily meals of the common people. This wasn't a kingdom where everyone aspired to eat like the king, a mainstream. Historical fact is that while the emperor's daily diet was primarily based on maize, beans, and squash, with protein supplements, grand ceremonial feasts like those after military victories or religious festivals could be incredibly lavish. These occasions would feature a wider array of foods, including exotic meats like deer, wild turkeys, various birds, and sometimes even, controversially, human flesh from ritual sacrifices. Though this was highly ritualized and not part of the everyday diet, you would see vast quantities of food prepared for thousands of attendees at these events. A display of imperial generosity and power. Now, for a quirky tidbit, despite these grand feasts, the everyday diet of the average Aztec citizen was remarkably consistent and, by our standards, quite limited. They relied almost entirely on maize, often in the form of tortillas or tamales, supplemented by beans, squash, and chili peppers. Meat was a rare luxury, perhaps a bit of turkey or dog, consumed only occasionally. The emperor's daily diet, though slightly more varied, was fundamentally an elevated version of this basic fare, emphasizing quality and freshness over exotic indulgence. Asterisk. Oh, your simple maize and bean meal. Knowing this was your constant, it certainly makes you appreciate the diversity of your own grocery store. Historians still argue whether the apparent simplicity of the imperial diet on a daily basis was a deliberate symbolic act of solidarity with the common people, a reflection of logistical challenges in consistently sourcing diverse foods, or simply a matter of cultural preference for staple-based nutrition. Was it calculated humility or just practical reality? Regardless, the feast or famine paradox of the Aztec diet reveals a society where opulence was reserved for ritual and display, while daily sustenance, even for the most powerful, remained grounded in the empire's agricultural bedrock. You'd certainly note the efficient, almost Spartan, approach to daily meals, a stark counterpoint to the dazzling displays of wealth in other aspects of Aztec life, given the reliance on maize and the emphasis on staple foods. Your curiosity might turn to the protein sources available to the mighty Aztec emperor. Did his diet, bland as it seemed, at least boast a rich variety of meats? The answer is both yes and no, revealing a fascinating hierarchy of animal protein that reflects the unique ecosystem of the Aztec world. A mainstream historical fact is that while large domesticated animals like cows or pigs, common in the Old World, were entirely absent in pre-Columbian Mesoamerica. The Aztecs cultivated a range of smaller, domesticated animals and hunted wild game. The most common domesticated meat sources were the turkey, Huey, Totolan, and the dog, Itzcuintli, specifically bred for consumption. These would have been the most readily available meats for the imperial kitchen. You would see flocks of turkeys wandering palace courtyards or designated areas, awaiting their culinary destiny, now for a quirky tidbit beyond turkey and dog. The imperial diet could include surprisingly varied and often exotic protein sources, demonstrating the empire's vast reach and ability to gather tribute. These might include various species of wildfowl caught from the lake ducks, geese, deer from the surrounding forests, and even, more rarely, jaguars or pumas, likely consumed for ritualistic purposes rather than regular sustenance, given their rarity and difficulty to hunt. Even more unusual, Spanish chroniclers mentioned aquatic insects, spirulina, algae harvested from the lake, and various types of fish and amphibians as part of the broader Aztec diet. Imagine an emperor being served a platter of highly nutritious dried lake flies. It certainly broadens your definition of imperial cuisine, doesn't it? Historians still argue whether the apparent lack of large domesticated animals was a limiting factor in Aztec dietary development, or if their efficient use of smaller animals and diverse aquatic resources provided adequate protein. Was it a dietary constraint or an adaptive culinary system perfectly suited to their environment? Regardless, the imperial kitchen would have the pick of the empire's most prized proteins, even if the sheer quantity or variety, by European standards, might seem modest. You would sense the careful management of these precious protein sources, knowing that each animal, no matter how small, represented a valuable commodity in the imperial diet. It truly puts a new spin on what constitutes a power lunch beyond the foundational maize and occasional proteins. Your mind might wander to the vibrant colors and fresh flavors that could have graced the Aztec emperor's table, fruits and vegetables. Mesoamerica was a land of incredible botanical diversity. Yet, how much of this bounty truly made it into the emperor's daily diet? The answer reveals a practical approach to produce, sometimes prioritizing availability over lavish display. A mainstream historical fact is that the Aztecs cultivated an astonishing array of fruits and vegetables through sophisticated agricultural techniques, including the famous chinampas, or floating gardens, around Tenochtitlan. These highly productive plots yielded diverse produce like squash, beans, which were a dietary staple alongside maize, tomatoes, avocados, various types of chili peppers, and numerous local fruits such as guava, papaya, and mamey. You would see markets overflowing with these fresh, colorful ingredients, brought in from the surrounding countryside and the Chinampas. Now, for a quirky tidbit, despite the abundance, the emperor's daily consumption of these items might not have been as varied as you'd imagine, often focusing on what was most easily cultivated and stored. While ceremonial meals might have showcased exotic fruits, everyday imperial fare leaned towards the reliable staples. Interestingly, many of the fruits we consider tropical today were simply local fruits for them, consumed without the fanfare we associate with exotic produce. Imagine seeing someone casually munching on an avocado like it was just another apple, or using a tomato primarily as a base for a sauce rather than a standalone salad ingredient. It certainly highlights the difference in culinary perspective, doesn't it? Historians still argue whether the apparent emphasis on staple vegetables, like squash and beans, over a wider variety of fruits in the daily imperial diet was a matter of nutritional priority, ease of cultivation, or simply cultural culinary preferences. Was it a focus on efficiency or a subtle preference for the familiar? Regardless, the emperor's table would always feature fresh, high-quality produce, a testament to the agricultural prowess of the empire. You would notice the deep, earthy tones of roasted squash, the bright red of fresh chilies, and the rich green of avocados, providing crucial vitamins and minerals to complement the maize and protein. It was a diet built on fresh, local ingredients, long before farm-to-table became a trendy marketing slogan. With the foundational elements of the Aztec emperor's diet now clear, your attention shifts from the ingredients themselves to the fascinating ritual of dining that surrounded the great Hui Tlatoani. This wasn't just about eating. It was a highly choreographed performance, a public display of power, hierarchy, and imperial majesty. Even if the food itself was surprisingly straightforward, a mainstream historical fact is that Montezuma, too, like his predecessors, ate his meals in strict privacy, often behind a screen or within a specially designated chamber of the palace. He was usually served by a retinue of high-ranking nobles and attendants, who approached him with utmost deference, their eyes cast down. The food would be brought in on pristine earthenware or even gold and silver platters, meticulously prepared and presented. You would never witness the emperor simply grabbing a quick bite. Every meal was a deliberate, ceremonial event, reinforcing his divine authority. Now, for a quirky tidbit. Spanish chroniclers reported that Montezuma's food was served to him in incredibly vast quantities, often hundreds of dishes, far more than any single person could possibly consume. These dishes, however, were not all unique concoctions. Many were repetitions of the same basic staples, prepared with slight variations or simply an overwhelming display of abundance. After the emperor had taken his small portion, the remaining food was then distributed among his palace guard and attendants. Imagine being a royal attendant, serving dish after dish to the emperor, knowing that most of it was purely for show, and then getting to enjoy the leftovers, perhaps a slightly less bland version than your own usual fare. It sounds like a rather elaborate form of quality control, doesn't it? Historians still argue whether the extreme formality and sheer quantity of food served to the emperor was primarily a demonstration of imperial wealth and power to both his court and foreign dignitaries, or if it also served a practical purpose in feeding his vast retinue. Was it pure spectacle or a very public, albeit elaborate, distribution system? Regardless, the entire dining experience was a carefully constructed ritual. You would hear the soft, rustling sounds of servants, the gentle clink of pottery, and the quiet reverence of the court, all setting the scene for an act of eating that transcended mere hunger. It truly transformed a meal into a performance, a silent testament to the emperor's unparalleled position as you contemplate the ceremonial grandeur. Surrounding the emperor's surprisingly simple meals, your palate might begin to crave a touch more zest. You wonder, how did the Aztecs, with their emphasis on natural ingredients, approach the art of chili and seasonings? The answer reveals a nuanced use of flavor, often subtle, but always impactful. A mainstream historical fact is that chili peppers, chili in Nahuatl, were an absolutely indispensable part of the Aztec diet, not just as a flavoring agent, but also as a significant source of vitamins. They cultivated a vast array of chili varieties, from mild to intensely hot, each with its own distinct flavor profile. You would find chili peppers, both fresh and dried, in every market. Their vibrant colors, red, green, orange, adding visual pop to the otherwise earthy tones of maize and beans. For the emperor, chilies would be freshly ground into sauces or incorporated directly into dishes, providing that essential spark of flavor. Now, for a quirky tidbit. While chilies were omnipresent, the Aztec imperial diet, particularly for the emperor, was not necessarily about overwhelming heat. Instead, it seems there was an appreciation for the subtle nuances of different chili varieties and their ability to enhance rather than mask the natural flavors of the food. Beyond chilies, other indigenous seasonings were used, though less widely documented. These might include epazote, a pungent herb, hoja santa, a peppery, anise-flavored leaf, and perhaps salt, which was a valuable commodity obtained through trade or evaporation. Imagine the emperor's atole or tamales infused with a delicate, smoky chili flavor or a subtle herbal note that gently warmed the palate. It was about balance and enhancement, not just raw spice. Historians still argue whether the Aztec preference for specific flavor combinations was rooted in nutritional wisdom, for example, using chilies for vitamins, or balancing flavors for digestion, or purely aesthetic culinary preference. Was it an intuitive understanding of nutrition, or simply what tasted good within their available ingredients? Regardless, the imperial kitchen would carefully select and prepare these seasonings. You would inhale the subtle, earthy aroma of freshly ground chili mingling with the comforting scent of maize, adding a quiet depth to the emperor's otherwise uncomplicated dishes. It reminds you that even the blandest sounding historical diet often held secret, delightful pockets of flavor waiting to be discovered by a discerning palate. As you imagine the subtle flavors of the emperor's chili-infused dishes, your mind naturally turns to the unseen army that brought these meals to life. The vast imperial kitchen staff. Preparing food for the Huey Tlatoani wasn't a simple domestic task. It was a highly organized operation involving hundreds, if not thousands, of individuals. From cultivators to specialized cooks. A mainstream historical fact is that the Aztec imperial palace, particularly Montezuma II's, was a massive complex that housed not only the emperor and his family, but also a vast retinue of nobles, servants, guards, and specialized personnel. Among these were an enormous number of individuals dedicated solely to the preparation and serving of food. Spanish chroniclers like Bernal Diaz del Castillo reported witnessing hundreds of cooks and food preparers working in the imperial kitchens daily, ensuring a constant supply of fresh, impeccably prepared meals. You would hear the distant sounds of bustling activity from the kitchen area, the rhythmic grinding of maize on matats, the crackling of fires, and the quiet murmurs of dozens of hands working in concert. Now for a quirky tidbit: the division of labor in these imperial kitchens was incredibly specialized. There were individuals dedicated solely to grinding maize, others to preparing particular types of dishes like tamales or sauces, and still others responsible for sourcing and inspecting ingredients to ensure they were of the highest quality and freshness. It wasn't just a kitchen. It was a complex logistical operation, ensuring that even the humblest atoli met imperial standards. Imagine a specific group of people whose entire job was to make sure the emperor's zaccolatl was perfectly frothed, or that the chilies for his sauce were precisely the right variety and heat level. It's enough to make you consider a career in ancient culinary arts, isn't it? Historians still argue whether the scale of the imperial kitchen staff was primarily a necessity given the lack of modern culinary technology, or if it was also a deliberate display of imperial power and wealth, showcasing the emperor's ability to command vast human resources. Was it simply a practical arrangement or a grand spectacle of servitude? Regardless, the efficiency and sheer numbers of these unseen workers ensured that the emperor's somewhat bland diet was at least consistently available and prepared to the highest possible standards of freshness and ritual purity. You would sense the quiet hum of their coordinated efforts, a testament to the intricate organization that supported every aspect of Aztec imperial life, even down to the emperor's next simple bite. After considering the surprisingly simple staples and the vast unseen army of kitchen staff, your thoughts might drift to something a bit more indulgent. Desserts and sweeteners. Did the mighty Aztec emperors, for all their dietary austerity, at least have a sweet tooth? The answer, like much of their diet, is both fascinatingly limited and subtly luxurious. A mainstream historical fact is that refined sugar, as we know it from sugarcane, was entirely absent in pre-Columbian Mesoamerica. The primary sweetener used by the Aztecs was honey, primarily from stingless bees, which was a valuable commodity. This honey would have been used sparingly, often reserved for special occasions or to sweeten particular ceremonial drinks rather than being a daily staple. You would find small pots of rich, dark honey, perhaps infused with a delicate floral scent, a rare indulgence in a diet focused on more savory and earthy flavors. Now, for a quirky tidbit beyond honey. The Aztecs did enjoy a few natural sweet treats. Ripe fruits such as mamey zapote and various types of plums would have offered natural sweetness when in season. They also used the pulp from the maguey plant agave to create a sweet syrup similar to modern agave nectar. But the idea of a dedicated dessert course with elaborate pastries or confections simply wasn't part of the Aztec culinary tradition. Imagine an emperor, after a hearty meal of maize and turkey, being presented with a single, perfectly ripe piece of fruit or a small cup of slightly sweetened atole as his dessert. It certainly puts a new spin on post-dinner cravings, doesn't it? Historians still argue whether the limited availability of diverse sweeteners led to a cultural preference for less sweet flavors in the Aztec diet, or if it was a deliberate choice rooted in health beliefs or ritualistic purity. Was it simply a matter of what was available, or a conscious culinary philosophy? Regardless, the imperial kitchen would certainly ensure the emperor received the finest and freshest of these rare, sweet indulgences. You would notice the rich, golden hue of the honey or the vibrant color of a perfectly ripe fruit, a testament to the empire's ability to procure even the scarcest luxuries for its ruler. It reminds you that luxury is often defined by rarity. And in the Aztec world, natural sweetness was indeed a precious commodity, beyond the staples and even the rare sweets. The Aztec imperial diet was also shaped by a fascinating array of forbidden foods, dietary restrictions, and taboos that influence not only what the emperor ate, but also the broader society's relationship with sustenance. These weren't just matters of taste. They were often rooted in deep religious beliefs or social distinctions. A mainstream historical fact is that various forms of dietary restrictions existed within Aztec society, often tied to religious festivals, specific social classes, or ritualistic purity. For instance, commoners generally did not consume certain prized game animals like deer or rabbits, which were largely reserved for the elite or for sacrificial offerings. While not forbidden in the sense of being toxic, they were socially restricted. You wouldn't find a commoner casually grilling a deer steak in their backyard. The imperial diet, by contrast, had access to these higher status foods, marking a clear distinction. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some food taboos were quite specific and curious. For example, during certain ritual fasting periods, even the emperor and priests might abstain from consuming chili peppers or salt, believing that such stimulants interfered with spiritual purity and focus. Imagine voluntarily giving up your favorite spicy salsa for spiritual reasons. Conversely, during certain festivals, specific animals or plants might be ritually consumed for their symbolic power, even if they weren't part of the regular diet. One of the more controversial forbidden foods, in the broader sense, was human flesh from sacrificial victims, which was consumed in highly ritualized contexts and never as a daily meal. This was not a dietary staple, but a profoundly symbolic act of communion with deities and a show of dominance. Historians still argue whether these dietary taboos and restrictions were primarily driven by religious dogma and a desire for spiritual purity, or if they also served practical purposes, such as managing food resources or reinforcing social hierarchies. Was it divine command or a clever way to control consumption? Regardless, the imperial kitchen would meticulously adhere to these restrictions, ensuring that the emperor's meals were not only prepared flawlessly, but also ritually correct. You would observe the careful separation of ingredients, the solemnity with which certain foods were handled, knowing that every bite had a deeper meaning beyond mere sustenance. It truly puts a new spin on clean eating, doesn't it? As you delve deeper into the nuances of the Aztec imperial diet, it becomes clear that food wasn't merely sustenance or a symbol of status. It also played a crucial role as a tool in food, a subtle yet powerful instrument in Aztec political relations and the intricate web of tribute and alliances that sustained the empire. You see, even a simple meal could be a profound statement, a mainstream historical fact is that the Aztec Empire was built upon a complex system of tribute from conquered or allied city-states. This tribute often included foodstuffs, sometimes exotic or rare items not commonly found in Tenochtitlan's immediate vicinity. When a newly conquered region sent its first tribute of unique fruits or game to the imperial capital, it wasn't just about feeding the emperor. It was a symbolic act of submission and integration into the imperial system. You would see long processions of porters arriving at the palace laden with baskets of produce. Their offerings, a silent acknowledgement of Aztec power. Now, for a quirky tidbit, diplomatic meals or banquets for visiting dignitaries from allied or vassal states were carefully choreographed events where the food served communicated subtle messages. The quality, variety, and exotic nature of the food offered could signify the strength of an alliance, the emperor's generosity, or even a veiled warning of his power. Imagine a visiting lord from a distant province being served a dish made with a rare bird from his own region, an implied reminder of the empire's vast reach and control over resources. It was a culinary flex, a delicious way to assert dominance without saying a word. Historians still argue whether the elaborate presentation of food during diplomatic events was primarily a means of showcasing imperial wealth and generosity, or if it was a more subtle form of psychological influence, intimidating or impressing visitors through sheer abundance. Was it hospitality or strategic display? Regardless, the imperial kitchen would be a hive of activity on such occasions, preparing not just the emperor's usual simple fare, but a wider, more impressive array of dishes designed to convey a political message. You would observe the careful placement of each dish, the solemnity of the serving ceremony, knowing that every bite consumed by a guest was part of a larger diplomatic dance. It really gives new meaning to the phrase, breaking bread together, doesn't it? Having explored the intricate world of imperial meals, from simple maize gruel to diplomatic feasts, your attention might now turn to the most fundamental of all thirst quenchers, water and beverages beyond the ceremonial soko ladle. What did the mighty Aztec emperors drink to stay hydrated? And were there any other interesting libations on their imperial menu? A mainstream historical fact is that clean drinking water was incredibly important in Tenochtitlan, a city surrounded by a brackish lake. The Aztecs developed sophisticated engineering solutions, including complex aqueduct systems, to bring fresh spring water from the mainland to the island city. This ensured a reliable supply of potable water for the entire population, including, of course, the imperial palace. You would see water carriers moving through the city, and perhaps even a dedicated aqueduct leading directly to the palace, providing fresh, cool water for the emperor's daily consumption. This commitment to fresh water supply was a remarkable feat of urban planning. Now, for a quirky tidbit beyond plain water. One of the most common everyday beverages for the Aztecs, including the emperor, was pulque. This was a milky, slightly viscous, and mildly alcoholic drink made from the fermented sap of the maguey agave plant. While stronger alcoholic beverages like akli, a more potent form of pulque, were largely restricted to priests, elders, or specific ceremonial contexts to prevent widespread intoxication. Pulque was a much more common, accessible drink. Imagine the emperor occasionally sipping on a cup of pulque. Its slightly tangy, earthy flavor, a refreshing alternative to water, offering a subtle, gentle buzz. It certainly wasn't about getting roaring drunk. It was about light refreshment. Historians still argue whether the Aztec cultural moderation regarding alcohol consumption, especially compared to some European societies, was primarily due to religious prescriptions, or if it was a pragmatic approach to maintaining social order in a highly structured society. Was it moral decree or simply good governance? Regardless, the imperial palace would always have access to the purest water and, when desired, freshly prepared pulque. You would notice the crystal clarity of the water served in elegant ceramic vessels. A simple yet vital luxury in such a grand city. The soft gurgle of water being poured, or the gentle froth of a freshly prepared pulque, would be comforting sounds in the imperial dining chamber, reflecting a surprisingly sober approach to daily hydration. As you mentally compare the emperor's diet to your own, you realize that the surprising simplicity of imperial meals wasn't just a quirk of the ruler. It actually reflected the broader, everyday meals echoes throughout the entire Aztec society. The foundations of their diet were consistent, emphasizing efficiency and nourishment for everyone, from the humblest commoner to the most powerful leader. A mainstream historical fact is that the vast majority of the Aztec population, regardless of social class, relied on maize as their primary caloric intake. Tortillas and tamales were ubiquitous, forming the core of almost every meal for everyone. This shared dietary foundation created a sense of unity, even amidst strict social stratification. You would see women across the city, from palace kitchens to humble homes, spending hours grinding maize on matats, a rhythmic, comforting sound echoing through Tenochtitlan. It was the sound of sustenance, common to all. Now, for a quirky tidbit. While the emperor's access to protein and rare goods was certainly greater, the basic flavor profile and preparation methods for many dishes remained consistent across social strata. A commoner's tamale might not have the exotic fillings of a noble's, but the maize dew, the steaming method, and the chili seasoning would be fundamentally similar. This meant that, at a very basic level, an emperor's breakfast, atole, was not fundamentally different in its essence from the atolla consumed by a farmer. It was a scaled-up, refined version, but recognizable. Imagine the emperor and a commoner both starting their day with a warm, comforting bowl of corn gruel, a silent, shared culinary experience. Historians still argue whether the remarkable dietary consistency across Aztec social classes was a testament to the efficiency of their agricultural system in providing staples for all, or if it highlights a lack of culinary innovation beyond the core ingredients. Was it resourceful adaptation, or a limitation of their available foods? Regardless, the simplicity of the imperial diet was not an anomaly, it was an echo. You would feel the shared experience of the Aztec people, united by the taste of maize, the warmth of chilies, and the refreshing purity of water. It reminds you that even in empires of vast power and wealth, the most enduring and essential aspects of life, like food, often remain surprisingly grounded and universal. The smells of roasting maize, of simmering beans, would be the constant, reassuring backdrop to daily life, regardless of who was eating them. As our journey through the surprisingly bland diets of mighty Aztec emperors concludes, you're left with a fascinating contrast: immense imperial power juxtaposed with a daily menu rooted in simplicity. This historical glimpse offers a chance to reflect on how their dietary choices, driven by culture, environment, and belief, compare to our own complex, modern dietary reflection. A mainstream historical fact is that our contemporary diets in many developed nations are characterized by unprecedented variety, global sourcing of ingredients, and often an abundance of processed foods, sugars, and fats. The Aztec diet, by contrast, was primarily whole food-based, seasonal, locally sourced, and high in complex carbohydrates, fiber, and lean protein from indigenous sources. You would see a stark difference in the sheer number of ingredients available to you at a modern supermarket compared to an Aztec market. This makes Montezuma's daily fare seem almost like a super healthy, minimalist diet, doesn't it? Now for a quirky tidbit. Despite our vast choices, many modern dietary trends often advocate for principles that unconsciously echo the Aztec approach: eating locally, consuming whole grains, relying on plant-based proteins, and valuing fresh produce. The Aztec emperor's breakfast of atole might be the ancient equivalent of a healthy, minimalist smoothie bowl, minus the exotic superfoods and Instagram filter. Imagine a modern nutritionist nodding approvingly at Montezuma's daily menu, perhaps, suggesting a bit more variety, but generally commending its foundational health. It really makes you wonder if sometimes less truly is more, even in imperial cuisine. Historians still argue whether the Aztec diet, despite its simplicity, was optimally nutritious by modern standards, or if certain micronutrient deficiencies existed due to the limited variety. Was it a perfect diet for its time, or did it have hidden drawbacks? Regardless, the Aztec imperial diet serves as a compelling reminder that power and luxury do not always equate to culinary extravagance. You can now let the vibrant images of Tenochtitlan, the rich aroma of maize, and the subtle flavors of chili gently recede. The sounds of ancient markets and imperial kitchens fade into the comforting quiet of your own space. Feel the warmth of your covers, the gentle support beneath you. Release any lingering thoughts of imperial banquets or humble gruel. The day's history lesson is complete, and the night is here to hold you gently. Let your breathing slow, deep, and even, like the gentle lapping of waves on a distant shore. Imagine the softest moonlight filtering through your window, casting a silver glow, reassuring and calm. Allow your eyelids to grow heavy, a comforting weight, signaling the final surrender to rest. Drift away on that feeling, knowing that sleep is a gift and it is now yours to embrace.